Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Lewis, and I'm the Global Partnerships and Network Manager for the Sexual Violence Research Initiative. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our second session of the first webinar in our new virtual series, Voices from the SVRI Forum 2024, Strengthening the Field Through Shared Learning. This series is made possible through co-funding from the Australian Volunteers Program. We are deeply grateful for your partnership with the SVRI and for your continued commitment to advanced learning and to field building. Over the coming months, this webinar series will unpack key findings and themes that emerged from the SVRI 2024. Earlier today, we hosted our first session in the Asia and Pacific time zone, focusing on technology-facilitated gender-based violence, or TFGBV, against children, adolescents, and young people, where participants shared powerful insights and reflections. For those who missed it, the recordings will be up online tomorrow. This session will continue the conversation as we look at how legal systems, social norms, and institutions, both online and offline, shape the way we understand and respond to TFGBV. Just some housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's session will run for 1 hour. All sessions are being recorded and will be publicly shared on the SVRI and the Australian Volunteers Program platforms. Our audience is muted, but we'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. So please let us know your name and where you're joining from. We welcome your questions and reflections throughout, so please feel free to use either the Q&A or the chat box. We'll do our best to bring as many of your questions into the conversation as time allows. A quick look at our agenda. We'll begin with an overview of key TFGBV-related findings from SVRI Forum 2024. This will be followed by a moderated panel discussion with our invited speakers. We'll then move into a live Q&A with your questions. And finally, we'll close with next steps and share the upcoming webinar in May. Our moderator for today is Aisha Margo, Advocacy Director at SVRI. Aisha will be guiding us through the discussions and the Q&A. And before we begin the conversation, I'd like to invite Liz Dartnell, Executive Director of the SVRI, to share some high-level findings of SVRI Forum 2024 related to TFGBV. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Liesl, and it's so great to be here and welcome everybody. The number of participants and the interest in this webinar really highlight the deep interest and urgent need to be addressing the issue of tech-facilitated GBV. And as Liesl has spoken about, the content of what I'm going to be sharing is drawn from research and conversations shared at the SVRI Forum that was held late last year. And we've just recently launched the SVRI Forum report, which Lisa will share the link to in the chat. And just to note that the findings of the presentation that I'll be giving to the findings in the presentation I'll give today really do resonate with key takeaways just recently shared from the third Global Symposium of Tech Facilitated Gender-Based Violence held in March this year. So there's a lot of layering of learnings as we move forward of this real need to understand this act and this evolving form of violence. So next slide, please, Liesl. So this quote by Jack S.M. Key, who is the co-founder of the Newman Fund, one of the first feminist tech funds, and who was a keynote speaker at SVRI Forum, really reminds us that digital technology isn't neutral. It's not just a tool. It's a space in which many of us are living our lives. It shapes how we connect to each other, from our very most intimate relationships to the systems and institutions that govern us, which we're going to be talking about today. And while digital platforms have really opened up some really new, wonderful spaces for us to express ourselves, why we're talking today is because they've also introduced new risks, especially for women, girls, and marginalized communities. So what are we talking about when we talk about TFGBV? Next slide, please, Liesl. It refers to any form of gendered harm that is enabled, amplified, or carried out through digital technologies, and includes blackmail using private photos, online stalking, impersonation, coordinated hate attacks, and spyware used to control and monitor others. These forms of violence we know often overlap and can escalate. They reinforce power imbalances and create a chilling effect, stopping many of us not wanting to feel safe and to participate online. And there is a strong link between offline and online violence. We also know that women with intersecting identities, such as women of color, LGBTQI+ populations, women with disabilities, and people in public life, especially women, are particularly targeted. Next slide, please. But today's discussion is going to really remind us that it's not just a tech problem. It's important to understand that TFGBV, tech facilitated gender-based violence, isn't simply about bad actors using good technology. It does reflect deeper structural inequalities. It can be about power, patriarchy, colonial legacies, economic inequality, and the failure of the institutions that are there to serve us the failure of those institutions to serve us are not protecting us, and especially those most at risk. Most digital platforms were not built with safety in mind, and that's important to remember. Many of our legal systems are often outdated and really trying hard to catch up. And those who are most harmed, especially folk in low and middle income countries, are often the least protected. So TFGBV is not necessarily just a glitch in the system, and it can even be said that it's actually a symptom of who the system was designed to serve. Next slide, please, Liesl. There was a lot of presentations at the forum around when children are the target. We know that children and adolescents are increasingly online and often online unsupervised. They're exposed to all the same types of abuses that adults are: bullying, grooming, harmful content. And this exposure is now occurring from a very young age. So it's not about just telling kids to be more careful. It's about equipping them, their caregivers. It's helping design smarter tools and creating programs that reflect the lived realities of families and children and communities. The Global Parenting Initiative was one of the programs that was shared at the forum, and you'll read more about that in the SVRI Forum report. And it really shows us how important it is to support parents and caregivers with tools to help keep their children safe. And it shows us that we have to move away from one-size-fits-all approaches. These systemic complex issues have no silver bullet. We have to invest in locally relevant, context-driven solutions. So what else is the research and practice telling us? So next slide, please, Liesl. We know very similarly, in the same way that offline violence expresses itself, it's often underreported, and underreporting is very widespread. Survivors stay silent due to shame, fear of retaliation, and the lack of trust in institutions, which I've already spoken about. And we know that legal protections are patchy, while in some high-income countries and some low-middle-income countries do have laws on image-based abuse. We are still lacking in many countries specific legal frameworks for TFGBV, and if they do exist, we're not really clear how to implement them and how they manifest or turn out in the legal system. We also know that tech can reinforce harm. We know that automated moderation systems often fail to detect abuse. There's often some cultural nuances, and where they even mistakenly take down survivors' content. And meanwhile, algorithms are designed to promote engagement. And that's important to remember, which means they often amplify the very content, the misogynistic, violent, abusive content that drives this form of harm. Next slide, please, Liesl. But it's not all bleak. There are solutions, and they are much more likely to be effective and sustainable when we center survivors in the development of these interventions and the implementation of these interventions. One powerful example shared at the forum, and there were many, so this is just one of many, is Ayana. It's an AI-powered chatbot that was developed in Brazil. But what's different about this intervention is that it was co-created with survivors and service providers. And it's a reminder that tech can be used to support safety, healing, and justice when it is designed with care. And yeah, the challenges are real, but it's not inevitable. And we can and must choose to build those systems that serve everybody. So next slide, please, Liesl. I think Lisa's going to speak a little bit more about this. But at the forum, the results of a global research agenda on TFGBV were presented. And this slide shows that the top questions per domain that the field said is important was the need for more robust context-specific data to really understand who is most effective, how are they impacted, what interventions work best at both preventing and responding to tech-facilitated GBV. There was also a need for a greater analysis of the effectiveness of policy and legal frameworks, so we're really looking forward to this discussion today, and to better understand the measuring of TFGBV safely and ethically. Next slide, please, Liesl. So building on the research agenda and some of the other gaps that were identified at the forum is that right now much of our data is coming out of high-income countries, but that is moving and changing. But that means the experiences of people in low and middle-income countries where legal protections and support systems are not strong are often underrepresented in our data. And we lack long-term studies on the impact of TFGBV. And we know very little about perpetration and the perpetrators. Who are they? What's driving them? How are they perpetrating this violence? And we're only beginning to explore how digital systems and AI design reinforce inequality and harm. And filling these gaps is essential if we want to develop effective responses. So what can we do? I'm reaching my final slide. Over to you. Next slide, please, Liesl. So we need to strengthen laws and enforcement. We need to smart investment in tools designed with safety and justice at their core. We need research that really does reflect local realities and is nuanced based on the local context. And crucially, we need to be holding tech companies accountable for the systems they build. And we need to be able to address them through legislation and policy. So I want to thank you for being part of this webinar session and to really be thinking around the laws and enforcements and the systems that are really enabling this form of harm. But before I hand over to our amazing panel and Aisha, I want to hand back to Liesl just to talk a little bit about the SVRI Forum.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much for grounding us in the powerful findings of the SVRI Forum 2024. So before we move into our panel discussion, I'm really excited to share that the SVRI Forum 2026 is coming. So we have announced it before, but this is the first platform where we're talking a little bit more about the dates and where it's going to be held. So it will be at the Grand Center, the Sentara Grand and Bangkok Convention Center at Central World, really in the center of Bangkok, lovely venue. And it will be held 5 to 9 October 2026. I'll add the link into the chat soon. So this will be really a global moment for researchers, practitioners, activists, policymakers to come together to connect, share, and learn. Our abstract submissions and registration will open in August of 2025, so please do stay tuned via the SVRI's website, our social media, and our update for more details. We can't wait to welcome you there. And with that, Aisha, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liesl. And hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Really thrilled to be here to moderate with this great panel of speakers. And I'm not going to delay any further. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers to you briefly. And I'm going to ask our panelists to please turn on their cameras if they can. So Felicity Mulford is a research manager at the Center for Information Resilience and leads research on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Through this work, Felicity combines her passion for women's rights and her research skills to strengthen data on TFGBV, raise awareness about the issue, and empower communities with practical recommendations. Alexandra Robinson serves as the Gender-Based Violence Technical Advisor for UNFPA. She's based at headquarters in New York. A lawyer by background, she holds experience working across humanitarian, peace, and development settings within a number of UN agencies, civil society, and government across the Asia, Pacific, and Africa regions. Yeliz Osman is a policy and program management specialist within the Ending Violence Against Women section based at UN Women's headquarters in New York. She's currently the global program manager of the Act to End Violence Against Women and Girls program, which is focused on strengthening women's rights movements, coalition building, and advocacy to end violence against women. And Marcela Oropa is a Mexican feminist activist and promoter of the Olympia Law, Ley Olympia, together with the Latin American Digital Defenders Network. She's also in charge of the Commission for Assistance to Victims of Digital Violence and general coordinator of Olymp A, the AI platform to assist victims of digital GBV. So let's get started and have this fascinating conversation. In this panel, as we've said, we're looking at the political and structural dimensions of TFGBV. And as Liz has already mentioned, this is highly complicated. We know it doesn't occur in a vacuum, and we know it's shaped by deeper structural and political forces. There is, of course, so much to explore here, and each of these panelists has very unique perspectives. Each of you bring something very different to this conversation. Felicity, if it's all right, I'm going to start with you. And I wanted to ask, so your work explores how intersecting online abuse drives real-world harms. And I thought this might be an interesting place to start because it sort of implicates how we frame this violence. Your study has revealed that there are real-world consequences, such as arrests and violence that were resulting from online abuse, specifically in Ethiopia. And how should this shape the way we frame TFGBV, not just as an online issue, but as a public safety and human rights concern?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me here today, speaking on this wonderful panel and sharing our research findings. So one of the key things that we've found in our research is that online abuse doesn't stay online. As you mentioned, we've found ample evidence of a myriad of different offline harms, from rape and arrest to physical violence. You know, family lives are damaged, professional lives are damaged. We've had individuals having to flee not just their homes, but also their countries after doxing and death threats. Now, those with public profiles, as Elizabeth already mentioned, sometimes face the worst of this abuse. And we're talking about, you know, politicians, TV hosts, activists, sports personalities. They often face some of the most prolific violence online. And this can actually have a chilling effect on those that actually engage with public discourse. This actually silences voices, and this can lead to the limitation of democracy. And it further marginalizes groups in society. Now, I actually remember in one of our workshops in Ethiopia, one of the women told me that the online space reminds her of the wild, wild west. She said that it's a lawless, ungovernable space where people believe they can do and say whatever they want. And I think that really signals one of the problems with the online environment and the lack of regulation so far. Now the consequences that I have just mentioned, I think really signal that TFGBV is way beyond just an online problem. You know, there are human rights implications as well as public safety implications here. Now, at the same time as looking at how this abuse has impacted women, we've also found that the online space tends to echo, reflect, amplify offline sentiment. Now, this definitely has a technological element to it due to the design of social media platforms, the algorithms they use, the moderation efforts that they employ. But I think we also have to think about some of the non-technological drivers to really understand some of the problems here. So that's some of those structural causes of this issue. Now, in some of the cases that we've looked at, many of those, like Ethiopia and Afghanistan, we see that patriarchal norms and misogynistic values often underpin a lot of the abuse. But we've also found that political desires and goals can actually drive TFGBV too. So, for example, we've been studying the US election and online abuse in that context, and we found a large volume of TFGBV targeting Democratic male candidates. Now, this in this context has been used as a tool to discredit their leadership abilities. So through emasculation and the use of feminine coded traits, the male candidate's credibility is basically undermined. And now this serves a political goal. It discredits their chances for office, number one, but it actually also reinforces those very harmful gender stereotypes that for leadership and to be a good leader, you have to be a strong, dominant, traditionally masculine male. And it's particularly alarming when we see a lot of that abuse comes from women presenting social media users commenting on these posts, and also female political opponents. So when you dig down deeper into some of these drivers, I think you can see a number of different human rights issues at play here. And I think these change context to context. So that depending on where we're looking at, the drivers really vary. Now, whether the driver and the technological design or the consequences, I think all of these things, come together to really show that the online and the offline spaces are intrinsically linked. So when we think about framing TFGBV, I think we really need to think through a joined-up approach, a holistic approach to understanding the problem. It's not just online. It's quite clearly a human rights issue, a public safety issue, a tech development issue, and a legislation issue. So I think we have to think about it through that holistic lens. And thank you very much. Back to you, Aisha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Felicity. I think that's a perfect way to actually begin this conversation. And I'm going to turn to Marcella because this is really interesting as well. Your work illustrates sort of at a national level, right? What happens when local feminist movements succeed in pushing for systemic legal reform. And specifically, you explore the impact of Ley Olimpia, which has emerged both as a legal reform and feminist movement in Mexico. So it'd be great to hear from you. What were the key turning points that actually allowed this movement to successfully translate what could be called social outrage into national legal transformation, and that too across all the Mexican states?
Well, thank you, Aisha, for this question. I think it was definitely, first of all, the power of victims' courage when they dared to tell their stories, which illustrated how communities turn violent against victims unfairly. So it was evident that it is a social problem, not a discussion between individuals, and that as it was previously perceived. I have to say that this movement started in 2013 when no one cared about this topic. It was not in the agenda of any government or international organization. So when they publicly shared what they really experienced after their sexual content was disseminated on digital platforms such as social networks or sexual digital exploitation markets, which are usually called porn pages, as if making an apology of the sexual exploitation of women, it was so powerful. And when they dared to name what was happening correctly, digital violence, not revenge porn, which is absolutely re-victimizing for them, people really understood what was this all about. By 2018, after 5 years of doing activism, we succeeded in having approved by a Congress in Mexico the first legal reform to prevent, address, and punish digital violence against women. And by 2021, it became a national law. By 2024, 3 more countries in the region had already approved Ley Olimpia. So we wrote and created the whole reform. It was not a reform created by authorities. We did not only inspire it. Each word, each line, each verb is created out of our own stories, and it is so complete that even today, after more than 10 years, we created it. It is working to judge cases in which guys use AI to create deep fakes of women without their consent.
Yeah, excellent. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's also remarkable, as you mentioned, that Ley Olimpia has become the model for many other laws in the region. And then looking at legal frameworks, and Alex, I'm going to turn to you because I know that some of what you focus on is legal frameworks, and your analysis has revealed fragmentation and gaps in the global legal frameworks addressing TFGBV. So what structural drivers do you think are sustaining this fragmentation? And then how do regional or multilateral mechanisms help us to align national laws around these shared and, as we've been talking about, human rights-based principles?
Thank you so much, Aisha. We embarked on a project maybe 2 years ago now with an organization based out of Latin America, Derechos Digitales, really conducting in-depth case studies across 8 different countries to try and understand what best practices look like and what do poor practices look like, and how do we then design guidance on supporting countries to develop rights-based law reform. Through that process, I mean, it's clear that TFGBV is a complex global issue that does transcend borders and sectors, and that we really need to pick up our work in better collaborating around this. So I think, you know, some of the fragmentation really is sustained by that disconnect between sectors focused on digital rights on one side and those focused on gender-based violence on the other. And we see digital rights groups, GBV practitioners, technologists, and government actors often approaching TFGBV from vastly different angles and using different language. So tech developers, for example, don't fully or don't necessarily fully understand how their products contribute to the risk of TFGBV, or what efforts they could make to actually mitigate harm. We see cybersecurity specialists typically focusing on organizational protection, but not safety of end users. And then on the other hand, we see GBV practitioners who may not always be aware of the importance of digital security and data protection in their work. So I think these sectoral silos often persist because of a lack of digital literacy. And so we have many policymakers, for example, creating laws without understanding the drivers of violence, such as data brokers and their opaque practices, or digital behaviors that enable harmful actions online. And I think without having that comprehensive understanding across all stakeholders, laws and policies may continue to have significant gaps. I also think we need to look at what better coordination and collaboration looks like with industry and industry standards. So UNFPA have done a mapping of global industry bodies and different standards, and as well as in some certain countries. And I think really picking up on what that collaborative effort looks like is really important. Obviously, the complexity of the issue demands international cooperation and multilateralism, and really does need to draw on the strength of diverse stakeholders. So some of these, the Global TFGBV Symposium that UNFPA hosts on an annual basis does offer a space for that dialogue, where both government representatives, civil society, and technologists and industry can discuss how to strengthen legal frameworks. And actually, over each year for the last 3 years, a focus on law, we have had that specific focus on law policy for this reason. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely on everything you're saying. And I want to pick up on what you were talking about around the disconnect between sectors, in terms specifically actually digital rights and GBV sectors. And I guess we think part of this is also around the evidence, right? And how the evidence is shared, that it needs to be shared adequately, that we need to build a stronger shared evidence base that can inform and influence both prevention and response efforts, and that is shared by us all. And I'm going to take that as a segue to you, Yeliz, because this brings us to the TFGBV research agenda, which I know Liz has mentioned briefly. And of course, UN Women were partners on the research priority setting process that resulted in this agenda. So can you talk a little bit more about the key findings with specific reference to the work that UN Women is doing on this issue, and sort of maybe tell us a bit about the relevance it has in terms of how you approach the work?
Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you so much to SVRI for convening this really important dialogue, and also for inviting UN Women to be part of this panel. UN Women was really excited to be part of the TFGBV Shared Research Agenda, and to partner with SVRI, APC, and others. And I really do remember our early discussions that emerged at the Wilton Park meeting, which was convened by the Global Partnership on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse, to take stock of evidence and knowledge on TFGBV. And I remember that at the time there was a divergence of opinions in terms of whether or not there was a need to invest more in research and evidence, with some participants feeling that there's already such a lot of evidence and data, so we just need to get on with it, and others feeling strongly that the lack of robust and comparable evidence and gaps in knowledge were really a barrier to be able to develop effective responses. And I think that's where the shared research agenda on TFGBV and its participatory methodology has really been fantastic, as it's really allowed us to reach consensus on what the gaps in evidence are, and to prioritize resources where they're most needed on a set of agreed research priorities, so that it's not just research for the sake of doing more research, but ensuring that research is really action oriented and that it fills vital gaps so that the field can develop more effective prevention and response strategies. And I think from UN Women's perspective, it's been a really useful framework for all of those working in the field. And it's been a powerful tool which has really been informing our work and guiding our advocacy, helping us shape policy and programming to address TFGBV more effectively. And I think it's also important to note that the priorities also align with the findings and recommendations of the last two UN Secretary General reports on the intensification of efforts to eliminate violence against women and girls, which UN Women drafts every 2 years with inputs from member states. And the last two reports are focused on TFGBV, and very similar findings have emerged, which really demonstrates the pertinence of the shared research agenda, and also that hopefully means that it will also resonate with member states in taking this forward. And just to give a couple of examples, for instance, the shared research agenda on TFGBV calls for more research on the nature, prevalence, and impact of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and also calls for the development of standardized, reliable, ethical, and safe measurement tools and standards. And these are also recommendations that have come through the SG reports. So UN Women has been working to fill data gaps through some of our country level and regional level studies on TFGBV, as well as studies that focus on particular groups of women that are escalated risk or that are heightened risk, such as women in public life. And we're about to start some research focusing on online violence against women, human rights defenders, and women's rights activists. And in 2024, UN Women was mandated by the UN Statistical Commission, together with WHO and UNFPA, to develop globally agreed methodologies and a statistical framework to measure technology-facilitated violence against women and girls, so that we can have comparable data globally. The shared research agenda also called for evidence-based interventions to prevent technology-facilitated gender-based violence, with a focus on shifting attitudes and behaviours of perpetrators. And this is an area of great relevance to UN Women, and we're currently doing some work on this as part of our wider work on transforming patriarchal masculinities. And we've partnered with Equimundo to roll out a multi-country study that explores the growth of the manosphere and online misogyny and hate speech, and how that's impacting social norms and perpetuating violence against women and girls across the online and offline continuum. So just to wrap up, I think the SVRI shared research agenda on TFGBV is really of huge relevance to UN Women's work and to the whole ecosystem working on GBV prevention and responses. And I think it's been really critical to shaping and informing our research and advocacy in this area, and we'll continue to use it to inform our work. And I think looking ahead to CSW next year, which is focused on access to justice, we really have a unique opportunity to think about the research questions in the shared research agenda that are focused on responses and justice for survivors of technology-facilitated violence against women, and using this as an advocacy opportunity so that we can enhance global standards in this area. I'll stop there and hand back over to you. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elise. That's a really useful overview of how the research agenda is actually really relevant and resonating with different organizations. And already I'm just like, oh my God, just from those first few questions, each of you has said stuff. There's so much going on in this environment, and I hope that our listeners are sort of being able to draw it all together. And just to say, we will be sharing the resources to everything that we have referred to during this. But we're going to talk a little bit more about responses to survivors and stuff a bit later. But I want to just shift the focus a little bit to tech platforms, which are really critical to this conversation, because there's a couple of really interesting things that I know the panelists have to say about this. So, Marcella, I wanted to ask you, found and described digital platforms as less responsive to lay Olympia's influence when you looked at it compared to state or societal actors. And I wanted to ask you, so what strategies do you think could be used to strengthen platform accountability? Because, of course, that's a huge debate in the TFGBV workspace. So to strengthen platform accountability in contexts where local legal reforms exist, but they're being weakly enforced.
Yeah, right. Well, as you mentioned, in our latest report, we found out that government had done a huge range of actions from women's ministries, public universities, cyber police, the attorney's office. All of them had done actions like obeying Ley Olimpia or Olympia law, these reforms to prevent, address, and punish digital violence. And we found out also that population had changed their minds, knowing that victims are not guilty for being disseminated their sexual content online. People point at the responsibility of aggressors, which is a huge step in this fight against digital violence. But what we also found out was that even thought that victims were searching for access to justice through authorities, and they found the support of authorities. What they didn't find was this access to justice, because authorities usually had to ask platforms for some information to get with the identity of aggressors, and platforms were not responding because they said that that law is not applicable to their country, and that they are not like obeying Mexican law because it's not a problem in their wherever they are based at. So we found there a first stop to get to platforms. Then later we found out what we call this patriarchal algorithm, in which this content, which is harmful for women, is hugely disseminated, in difference to other content, which is like women on power positions or in science. And this gap between the easy way to get to many people by disseminating sexual intimate content of women, and women in better positions, is harmful for women. So we have been like trying to get access to communicate with platforms. Platforms have people, at least in Mexico, not in every country of Latin America, but they have some of them have people in Mexico to respond. However, these people is not the one who takes the decisions, and they can give you a great speech about what they are doing. However, what is seen is the lack of response and the lack of responsibility. So we're pointing strongly to regional regulations, such as what has happened in Europe, for example, but in Latin America, as it is like, yes, a supranational issue. Digital violence does not stop in geographic limits, you know. We can have an aggressor in Colombia, but against a victim in Mexico, and so we point at transnational regulation, maybe international trade, or these regional regulations in which countries demand platforms I forget how to say it, like with algorithm, like they say how they do these programs. And also, because I speak a lot of this in Spanish and I forgot how to say it in English, sorry.
Thank you.
All of this, and also knowing that platforms have accumulated a power that is sometimes huger or more huge than the power even some countries have. So that's why like many countries have to get united to do this legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna make a bit of a jump. So a bit of a different context around platforms, but Felicity, I think it is all connected. You work on sort of platform-specific abuse patterns, and you're looking at exploring TFGBV in conflict-effective and under-researched contexts using mixed methods, including multilingual content analysis, right? Okay, I was just like, am I going to get that out without tripping over my own tongue? And it incorporates multilingual hate speech lexicons or dictionaries. So what insights has that approach brought about platform-specific abuse patterns, and what are its limitations in under-resourced language context? That's a lot of words. Sorry, but I know you'll make that clear for us.
No, thank you so much. And I'm going to illustrate my answer to this question through examples from our Ethiopia project. So as part of our Ethiopia project, we work with Ethiopian social media experts and gender experts and civil society leaders. And we actually manually annotated more than 25,000 pieces of social media content across 5 different platforms. So YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, X, and Telegram. And we did that in 4 languages. So Afan Oromo, Amharic, Tigrinya, and English. So our team had amazing colleagues who represented and spanned those languages. Now, we found platform-specific abuse, but also platform variations in TFGBV, and platform similarities, sorry. So I'll give you a couple of examples quickly, but for example, on TikTok, it's a kind of platform that encourages virality, and virality tends to mean emotion, emotive content, things like that spread faster. And so you're kind of celebrated if you're viral, right? You get more followers, and so in these forums you see a lot of love and hate, and you see a lot of pressure on the people who are speaking on these platforms, and this leads to a lot of polarization. And then on YouTube we saw different trends. So we saw more politically motivated or ethnically driven gendered abuse on YouTube compared to, let's say, TikTok. And I think this is partly to do with the longer formed content that you have there. It's more about news and information sharing, less so about entertainment and fast viral clicks. But across all 5 of those platforms, we saw some really key similarities. So persistent sexualization of women, stereotyping, and demeaning rhetoric. Now, I think what that signals is the need for both platform-specific solutions, so technological solutions for each platform to go away and sort out, but also societal shifts. So underlying all of this, we can still see that there is a need for education to dismantle some of these underlying views and norms that are allowing GBV to flourish. Now, the interesting part is when we put all this to workshop participants in Ethiopia. So we held lots of focus groups with civil society leaders, human rights experts, and they told us, yeah, we're not surprised by any of this, but what we really have is the lack of trust in the platforms. We just do not trust them, their content moderation practices. You know, when we report content, it's never taken down, even if it's really harmful. And they really called for more content moderation across their platforms. However, rather than increasing content moderation, what we're seeing is quite the opposite at the moment. So X a few years ago, and more recently Meta, have actually removed their third-party fact-checking, and in the name of free speech. And there's a reason why I bring that up now in the context of Ethiopia. So by removing third-party fact-checking, you're relying on automated tools for content moderation. These automated tools rely upon large language models, which are trained on primarily dominant languages like English, not Ethiopian languages, right? So what we decided to do was test how effective these large language models are at detecting hate speech in those 3 dominant Ethiopian languages. Now, bearing in mind, Ethiopia has about 80 languages, albeit not all on the internet. And we've tested the dominant 3, so Amharic, Afan Oromo, Tigrinya. And we then compared it to English. And we said, how effective is this large language model at detecting the hate? And there was a 50% reduction, so 50% less effective at detecting hate in any of the Ethiopian languages that we looked at. And I think that's really important to say. That might sound like, oh, 50% is quite a lot, but it's really not very good. So the moving away from third-party fact-checking might be okay in countries like the US, where the tools are trained on the dominant languages spoken. But this is actually a real threat to countries like Ethiopia, which don't have one of these dominant languages or large databases that these large language models can train their data on. So it's really, I think, a huge threat for people in countries like Ethiopia. Now, another thing quickly to consider here is the impact of cross-platform pollination of hate speech. So we know that hateful content traverses across these social media platforms, often before it's detected and removed. Now, this means that the policy changes at, say, like Meta and X, even if they're not, well, even if other platforms don't follow suit, they can still have a knock-on effect because the overall online environment becomes less safe because some of this content will proliferate on certain platforms and can be spread easier. So I think through our work, which is multilingual, multi-platform, we're really seeing a bit of a crisis in content moderation. And where the users are telling us we want more moderation, the platforms are backtracking. So I think that's, I'm hearing Marcella, and I really feel your pain in that we feel like they're not responsive, right? But I think this is something of great concern for many people joining Facebook, joining all these different platforms in this age of social media. They're not going to be as protected as if you spoke a dominant language. So I think, yeah, perhaps there might need to be some ethical discussions about how these businesses are run moving forward, and we'll see where it goes. But yes, I think that's all for now. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you, Felicity. It's fascinating and so complicated, this cross-platform abuse. And as you've all mentioned, like when it's in different countries, and then if you don't have regulations that people, are stepping up to uniformly, it's so challenging. The detection, the response, how do you hold platforms accountable? How can legal frameworks respond? So Alex, I'm going to springboard from all that to you now and say, and go back to sort of legal responses and say, what does it then mean in practice to embed survivor-centeredness into digital law reform? Like, how do we keep that at the center? And how do we balance the need for individual redress with the push for broader systemic change?
Thanks, Aisha. I think to embed survivor-centeredness in digital law reform, we need to ensure that the laws aren't just punitive, but they're also protective, that they're empowering for survivors. And while the criminalization of certain forms of TFGBV is a really important step towards legitimizing the experience of survivors through the justice system, I think we have to be cautious about relying solely on state-led punitive measures. And I think this really came out strongly during our TFGBV symposium as well. Because I think if we do, it risks sidelining survivor agency, and the state may presume to act on their behalf rather than truly considering what survivors need or want. So I think civil remedies are a really important complement and sometimes alternative to criminal prosecutions when addressing TFGBV. They may align better with individual needs, with options for redress, including financial compensation, injunctive relief, and legal action, obviously, against platforms that refuse to remove non-consensual content. And I think in that way, civil recourse can also lead to systemic change by holding platforms and tech companies accountable for the environments they create, incentivizing them to adopt stronger safety measures. I'd also highlight the criticality of ensuring meaningful participation of GBV actors, practitioners, as well as organizations and groups that represent survivors throughout that policy and law development process. Laws that aim to protect the rights and uphold freedoms must be shaped by those they intend to protect. So policymakers should involve a wide range of voices in participatory and transparent processes. That also allows policymakers to craft law and policy that are genuinely responsive and ensure that survivors' voices are central in shaping reform. So that could take the form of public consultations, focus group discussions, and written submissions. I also just want to highlight, I think it's really important that lawmakers prioritize safety, security, privacy by design. We need to be at a point where we're mitigating the risk of harm or preventing the risk of harm before it happens. Content moderation, removing one piece of content is like removing a grain of sand from a tidal wave of sludge. We really need to be thinking what prevention and mitigation looks like, and embedding survivor-centered design principles like do no harm into tech product development and regulation can really help prevent TFGBV before it occurs and drive systemic change in the tech industry, creating environments that prioritize risk mitigation. This also ensures digital platforms are part of the solution and not the problem. And I can throw in the chat here, UNFPA, along with New Moon Fund, and the UK FCDO, with the support of eSafety Commissioner in Australia, just ran a TFGBV mitigation program called the Safety Showcase, where we highlighted a range of tech products that are centering gender or reimagining gender at the center of tech and what that can look like. In essence saying it's not just something we have to do, it is in fact possible to do. So thank you, Aisha.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex. So much of that resonates highly with, in fact, things that came out in the research priority setting process as well. under the responses and prevention domain. And I'm going to end with you, Yeliz, for our last question, going back to the evidence base and the research priority setting process, and ask you, what can that or has that taught us about the kinds of cross-sector collaborations and funding models that we are going to need to strengthen TFGBV research, particularly when we're looking at under-resourced or politically complex settings?
Thank you, Aisha, for that question. So I think the process of developing the shared research agenda on TFGBV really does offer some important insights into the kind of cross-sector collaborations and funding models that are needed to really strengthen the TFGBV research. But I would say not only research, I think it also provides important lessons that can be taken into designing and implementing policies, advocacy strategies, and programming to prevent and respond to TFGBV. I think one of the most important elements about this model is that we can't just have donors or funders and academics alone defining research agendas or priorities. And the fact that this was a very collaborative, participatory and inclusive process that enabled the participation of such diverse stakeholders from civil society and women's rights organizations, to practitioners and survivors, the tech sector, to all contribute their perspectives. I think it's critical to ensuring that those that are doing the work on the ground, or those with lived experience, can really inform the priority setting, which is really key to ensuring that we have collective ownership and enhancing the legitimacy and ensuring that the research agenda reflects diverse perspectives across global North and global South. I think we also really need to see more of this kind of collaborative model in TFGBV research, particularly in this current context with shrinking resources. We really need to ensure that funds are going where they're most needed, and where that new research is really contributing to and building on the existing evidence base and filling gaps that are going to really enable us to advance the agenda. And I think in that sense, the shared research agenda is a model that, in my opinion, would be really good to replicate at the country level, because I think whilst there are commonalities globally, I think doing this type of exercise of identifying key gaps and priorities in different contexts would be key, because in every country there may be different sort of not everyone's starting from the same place. So I think it would be really important to think about doing such an exercise at the national level. And I also think that this process offers lots of important lessons about the benefits of cross-sectoral collaboration and funding models to strengthen our global efforts on prevention and responses to TFGBV. And I think Alex mentioned this earlier, and I think other panelists have alluded to it as well, that the answers and solutions to TFGBV don't lie in one sector, and there isn't one intervention, but rather there are multiple fields that need to be part of the conversation and working collectively towards finding solutions. And this includes governments, but also GBV experts, researchers, practitioners, and feminist tech and digital rights specialists, as well as the technology sector. So I think building on this model, it would be great to look at a collaborative process for defining what works and preventing and responding to TFGBV, for instance. And I know that that's one of the priorities within the shared research agenda, but I think it's going to take quite a lot of time to fill these evidence gaps. So I think it's important for us to think about what we can do in the meantime, because we still need immediate responses and solutions to address TFGBV whilst we're doing the sort of evidence building work. So how can we foster greater collaboration and coordinate efforts to share and exchange promising practices and create safe spaces for collaborating, for thinking outside of the box and really enabling us to learn from each other? And I think the SVRI community of practice on TFGBV is really a great example of and a good model for doing this. And UN Women is really happy to collaborate with members of the community of practice in the development of our forthcoming compendium on emerging practices on TFGBV. So I think that even while we're strengthening the evidence base, it's important to think about how we can foster these types of collaboration across sectors. And just one final point, I think Alex spoke a lot about the silos between the digital rights movements and experts and the GBV field and the experts there. And I think that this is really critical, because I think those working in the GBV prevention field have really accumulated such a wealth of knowledge and evidence over the last couple of decades on what works in preventing violence against women and girls. And when we think about the root causes of technology facilitated violence against women, they are the same as other forms of violence against women. So it's really crucial that we're building on the existing good practices and thinking about how we can adapt those to online spaces in some cases and not reinventing the wheel. And at the same time, we know that there are specific dynamics or features of online spaces that do require different forms of expertise and skills and different strategies to the offline or community-based interventions. So I think working with those in the tech sector and feminist tech and digital rights experts would be really powerful to start to create those opportunities and through funding models that really intentionally look at calling for this type of cross-sectoral collaboration to allow cross-fertilization across the different fields. And for instance, I think it would be great to see funding that would allow for tech experts and feminist tech in particular to sit down with GBV experts and really think about, okay, what are the interventions that we know work in offline settings, and what would it take to adapt these safely and ethically to working online? Because I think there's a huge untapped potential of using online platforms for really advancing on gender equality and on prevention of violence against women and girls, particularly through transforming harmful social norms and harmful masculinities. So just to end, I think to say that this is a real priority for UN Women, and one of the ways we're thinking about doing this work under the ACT to End Violence Against Women and Girls programme is really thinking about facilitating dialogue and policy exchanges across these different movements, and really thinking about developing shared language, shared vision, and cross-sectoral movement strengthening and coalition building so that we can really move this agenda forward collaboratively. I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much, Aisha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elise. And thank you very much to all our panelists. I know those were lengthy and complicated questions, and I thought you all did a brilliant job of giving actually very concise and powerful answers to them. So I really appreciate that. We have kind of run out of time. I think we might have time for one question, or maybe we shouldn't push it and actually just go to closing and say that we will, because otherwise we're going to run over time, and I don't want to do that. I think we'll say that we will answer the questions and send all the resources to everybody who has registered for this webinar and everybody who's been here, including the recording. All the resources and the outstanding questions will be addressed in an email with all of that. I hope that's all right. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'm going to hand back to Liesl while saying thank you so much, Liesl, for pulling these webinars together. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you so much to our panelists. Over to you, Liesl.
Thank you, Aisha. So thank you all for joining us today for this incredible discussion. It really reminds us of the importance of collective learning and reflection in building stronger, more just systems for survivors. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to our partners, the Australian Volunteers Program. We also extend our deep appreciation to our speakers, Alex, Elise, Felicity, Martella. Thank you for your contributions, Liz, for grounding us in the forum findings, and to Aisha for once again guiding us with such thoughtfulness and care and clarity. So thank you for that. Please do stay connected. Sign up to the SVRI newsletter. I'll add that to the chat now. That's the best way to receive updates on the SVRI Forum 2026 and any other related information. And then also, we hope to see you at our next webinar, where we'll explore economic empowerment and violence prevention with 2 sessions offered across different time zones once again. And this will take place on the 14th of May. So I will very quickly pop those links into the chat before we close the webinar completely. So there. And apologies. Please do sign up. All right. Thank you very much. Have a very good day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
Bye.